Hello everyone, today I'm looking at Inscryption. This game is... wow. I was completely blown away by Inscryption. Right off the bat, I have to say this is an almost must play. This is an absolutely fantastic, amazing, interesting game. And I would say, video game creepypasta horror done correctly. Just super impressive. And, I had heard things that this game was actually very good and how it deals with narrative. I thought, okay, cool, the cards are talking, the cards are sentient, great, whatever, that's it. No. So not only, and I'll be upfront, I despise card games. I hate card games because it's like I could play this not in a video game. I could play this wherever. I don't need to play this in the mode of a video game. It's just a card game. I don't need to do this. But what's crazy is that it uses the cards as part of the narrative. And so not only is the game itself fun as the general card game, but there is a narrative, which is a narrative on narrative. It goes between so many different levels that I thought, okay, there's one level where you're playing the game and it turns out, the game is actually real and it infected everything. No, there are like 3 to 4 different levels. And what amazes me about this game is that even up till the end of the game, it was still throwing new things at you, new mechanics, new instances, new interfaces, and the ending to this game is just a combination of a bunch of different aesthetics and gameplay styles and really fascinating, interesting stuff. So when you start off initially, it's really interesting how you're trapped in this cabin and you're with this guy and he's using all these beast cards. And so it's very spooky and creepy and whatever. And you think, okay, whatever, this is just, part of the cycle of figuring out exactly what I have to do. And so essentially you just kind of play around until you figure out exactly what you actually have to do. And it's funny because that it's positioned as a roguelike where you keep trying to do the same 3 missions over and over and over again, or the same 3 bosses in this little map where you go on an auto path and you get to choose your path. But what occurs is that there's also kind of like these little puzzles you do in the cabin itself, and I found that to be super interesting because when you're in the cabin, there's like certain things you can interact with, and there's certain characters, and again, there's certain characters who live in some of the cards, and it was super interesting to just, go through this whole process. And so once you solve enough problems in the cabin, enough puzzles, then it's like, okay, now you just have to beat him. And so what occurs is that you basically need to you need to beat 3 bosses and then the 4th and final boss. And I was able to do that with using custom cards. So again, some of the cards are speaking, and for me, one of the cards, every time you die and you fail, you get a death card. And so you actually get to make a custom card, which is a combination of your deck up until that point. And the basic way the game works is that, you get some of the weakest animals, which are squirrels. And so the squirrels cost nothing to summon, and they have almost like 1 defense, nothing they can actually do. So what occurs is that you sacrifice squirrels or other animals, and you basically can summon other animals that do damage, and you have attack, defense, and it's all very low numbers, like 2s, 1s, 3s, 5 at most. But it can go definitely beyond that. And then you have certain little mini events in between each battle on the map, which are things where you can gamble, resting your animal by the fire that, is by a bunch of starving guys, and it'll power it up. But if you keep it there too long, they'll eat it. There's another one where you, can consume special items. And so that allows you to do things like, make special summons, give you extra points. You're fighting the enemy, and whenever they don't have any cards on the screen, or wherever they have an open spot out of the 4 cards across, and if you attack them directly, you can attack their life points, for lack of a better word. And so you basically need to get around 7 or so points in order to win the match, but it balances out so that if they hit you on your life points, then at most you might need to do 14 points of damage. Outside of that, there's also a reward for overkilling the enemy, which I found very, very compelling, which feels really great, where if they're at 6 out of 7 damage and it only takes 1 more, if you overkill them by 4, then you get 3 extra points that actually go towards these gold teeth points. And you can use those to buy certain items elsewhere on the map, which will give you special cards and a kind of a buff to your deck. And so you basically want to build you're trying to get the best RNG stuff. There's an example, there's a wood carver lady where she'll have a special combination of items and statues, where you have a body which can do an effect and a head which will do it for certain animals. So it'll make all wolves fly, or all bears invisible or something. And so those are very, very useful for when you want to just get an automatic buff, a passive buff, no matter what. And so besides from enhancing your cards, there's also rolling for new cards, challenges, where it's like trivia, like, okay, draw 3 random cards from your deck, but they all have to be of the same animal type, or have to equal or exceed this attack power, and stuff like that. And again, so that's just a normal card game. And that goes on for a while, and I don't want to give too many spoilers here. I mean, I might as well, since the game has been out for quite a while now, but you really should play this game blind, because I was not prepared for where it was going to go and how well it was going to do it. Where at one point it's like, okay, on the map that you're playing, you are approaching a cabin on the map that looks very much like the cabin you're actually in. And then so you do this final battle or whatever, and then it turns out that this entire time you haven't actually been playing the game. You've been playing as a guy called Luke Carter playing the game. And Luke, as it turns out, is a YouTuber game, card game enthusiast who unpacks cards and essentially like reviews them online and stuff. And so, it's just crazy how the next segment you're kind of watching a bunch of YouTube found footage videos, of what he went through, and you're just slowly unveiling this very super weird conspiracy story. And I think I need to spoil this and talk about it, because it actually is a fascinating deconstruction of the genre, in that it's talking about why these cards have power and why these cards have sentience, essentially. And so what occurs is there's this conspiracy that and it's very unclear, but the overall thing is that you go from playing this roguelike game to find out this is actually a recording of some YouTuber who found God, it was so crazy. He goes to a garage sale, finds a card inside the pack of an old game called Inscryption that leads him to find coordinates in the woods, which leads him to find a floppy disk of a video game version of the card game, which then leads him to start playing it and recording it. And once you kind of get to that point, you can start a new game, and then you have to play the real game Inscryption, which is all pixelated. So the first act is the cabin. The second act is this overworld where the cabin is just 1/4 of that area. And thankfully, it's much easier. when you're in that mode, but you kind of realize there are 3 different bosses and 3 more different decks to choose from. So I thought, I've only played like a quarter of the game. I have no idea how this is going to turn out. And so what happens after that is that the final chapter is when you're in the robot facility, actually. And when you're in the robot facility and you're fighting the robot boss, that's when it goes back to HD from pixelated. And that's funny because after that trial with the robot character, the game actually ends, because what occurs is that the robot character basically says, in the mode of playing the game with him, the initial reason that you were playing initially was that just to beat this guy and continue the game, but now you're playing with this robot character because he's the one who essentially wants to wants you to help him finish making the game Inscryption and then upload it to the net so that they can be free, because the characters within the cards and the characters within the game are actually sentient. And so here's where it comes to a very interesting narrative perspective, where it really asks the question, and in that lab also there's a great lore drop by the trader character, who essentially gives you all this information, where it says, what is it about playing cards or things or cards in general that make them feel like they have energy, that make them feel alive? And so they bring up the analogy of the tarot cards. And you think, oh yeah, so there's this ideology or this superstition that tarot cards have magical properties, and yet we don't apply that same sort of superstition to things like Pokemon cards or Yu-Gi-Oh cards, like they're just cards. It might be a Christian mom outrage thing back in the 90s to worry about, but it certainly wasn't something that people associated, like these aren't actually magically imbued things, but people still, it is possible for people to think that. And so what the sort of overall arching lore of the game is that's really fascinating is that, why is it that tarot cards have magic powers? And the idea, it kind of goes back to, the Old Testament with Solomon, where it's the idea that he could bound spirits, angels or demons, into inanimate objects. And the idea that you're putting a living thing or a spirit or an entity that is human or non-human into this non-living thing and trapping them, that's kind of like the basis and standard of horror, honestly. You think about the simplest aspects of horror, and I've always thought about this as well. What if you could trap a human inside the most redundant inanimate object, and that it is essentially suffering? And this is very similar to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. That's the entire concept, is that he's transformed into a creature that wishes it could scream, but it can't because it lacks the ability to do so. It completely lacks the autonomy, really. And that's what's horrifying about it, that you have this real human like consciousness in a thing that is not able to exercise its free will. And that makes it very, very scary. So in this game, it's like, well, what if one of the game developers somehow, Casey, whose name keeps coming up, was actually able somehow to find a way, a code to imbue spirits into the cards, like the tarot. And if she was able to do that, she was also able to imbue spirits via computer code into a video game. And so this guy, Luke Carter, who keeps searching for evidence of, this game existing and, asking his audience, emailing the game company. Well, eventually they do show up and they start asking him very uncomfortable questions. But he begins realizing, he's trapped up in something really crazy. And the fact that the game company tried to destroy all copies of the game because it essentially was black magic. It was essentially, we're not really sure their motivations why. It could have been a government cover-up, but they did not want anyone to know that what they had created was real, essentially. That this was actually an aspect of not necromancy, but like some kind of ancient magical sorcery that was not supposed to be here at all. And it's very, very disturbing and super, super weird. And again, it's that entire concept of putting a human element in a non-human thing. Anyway, so that narrative thing actually makes sense. So it's taking the entire idea of playing a card and the card having magical properties and saying, yeah, this actually makes sense in a certain way. And again, it's just such an amazingly smart deconstruction and really insightful that really makes you think about, oh yeah, this actually makes sense. Like this does actually make sense that you would have these beings trapped inside this fake reality, essentially. And so it's interesting how when you're playing the game, not the card game, but I guess the card game and the video game, is that all the characters within the game themselves are conscious. And what's really fascinating is that they've all been competing with each other as if it was a real, like, I don't know, pseudo-political discourse that, you know, each one of the four lords wants to rule over. And so when you start the game, you don't have new game, the new game button, you only have continue. And so the guy you're fighting, Leshy, is actually one of the four scribes that apparently came to the world in their lore, in the video game lore, and basically created life out of his camera. The other ones used, technology, magical painting, and necromancy, literally. And so it unveils this whole thing, and you start to realize that certain characters, like when Leshy puts on the mask of the prospector boss and the fisherman boss, etc., that those are real characters from the game. And it's this really weird thing where he's been in control, and when you finally beat him and find a way to essentially get the new game plus, you reset the universe. And when you reset the universe, all the other three bosses are essentially free. So this is just super, super interesting, because now that they are free, they're free to also compete with each other. And so instead of being trapped in the cards themselves in the game, they are now, again, competing. And what happens is the robot character kind of tries to take over, and his whole beef, essentially, is that, how would I say this? He basically wants to free them all. And so by doing his little things, he basically changes to the table and forces you, or the character, but Luke Carter's going along with it. He forces you to play his game just like Leshy. And when he does that, he's basically making you, there's some amazing mini games in here where he has this mini game where he accesses your hard drive, and he forces you to like feed him files from your quote unquote PC. And so, and he'll eat them and consume them. There's another one where you take screenshots of the board. And the final one that I think is absolutely, again, a total deconstruction, a total game breaker, total meta commentary, is that he says, you get to design your own boss and your own, boss rules and your own custom cards. And it's actually crazy. And you do have, what I do love is they give you a very small selection. It's not like this huge massive thing. It's like you have 5 choices for his mouth and face. You have 5 choices for a few things, like every time you play a card or every time it's your turn, then either you take all damage, or you like a random card takes 5 damage, or every card takes 1 damage, or the enemy will spawn like a leap bot or something, which I found that was the best one because they do 0 attack and 2 defense. And if you have a bunch of flying animals or creatures, they just shoot right over it. And again, when you're playing as the robot, so this is the other thing that I really love about this game, is that when you're playing as in the robot world, you only have robot cards, and when you're playing in the the cabin, you only have beast cards. And so it's not just that the setting and the characters change, but the actual mechanics of the board game and the rule set also change, and your strategies change. So it's still the same game, but in the robot one, you have now 5 lanes. You now have energy cells where you basically every turn you get an extra energy cell to summon like one of your robots. And as that increases, you can summon your most powerful robot. So if you draw all power 5 robots, you can't do anything. You're kind of screwed. And then you look at upgrading your weakest robots. And so again, they also said they let you design one. So I made one called Holy Fire 2000, and it was a small guy who was essentially, he was a flying robot that did 3 damage, but he only cost 1 energy tank. And I supplemented that by making him brittle, but also so that he dies after 1 shot, but he also becomes deathless. So as soon as he fires, he goes back in your hands because you're going to use him once anyway. So it was this incredible thing where I could just spam 3 shots, and because he's flying, it attacks the life points directly. And if you only need 7 to win, it's like incredibly cheap. And I felt like I actually broke the game by making that character. I felt like a giant, a giant brain guy for doing that. It was absolutely so cool and so insane that they let you do that. And of course, that's what roguelikes are like, right? They're like, you want to find the biggest exploit. There are other things where you sacrifice cards to like get a bone everything, and so that's the other thing. So you also have bone cards, and they keep slowly introducing all these mechanics. So bone cards are where every time one of your cards dies, and you have to sacrifice them anyway to summon other animals or other cards, you get a bone point. And so there are some creatures that can only be summoned via bone points if you've sacrificed enough already. And again, when you've done that, they have a whole different rule set and a whole different perspective. But yeah, it's just super impressive how much the game lets you mess around with it. It's just a lot of fun. And so again, you realize that certain characters in certain locations of the game are actually real characters in the real game. And again, you have this whole meta commentary that Luke has been playing this game this whole time through his recording. So even when you go back to level select, Luke basically decides the level via his recording. Another really cool thing is that you can also, if you have duplicates of cards, you can saw them together if you come across like the weird doctor guy. Again, you can do, challenges where you like to do a little trivia about your deck or whatever. And there's just a lot of experimentation. For example, like there was this one sacrifice to get like a bone card to get a free bone every match. And I sacrificed a pelt once, and it says the gods were displeased. They do not give you a card for the sacrifice. So yeah, there's just a lot of unknown uncertainty, and also they kind of give you the rules, but they let you kind of experiment and find out how far the rules go, which makes it really, really fun. And so having a super high level guy is not actually the best, because if he has a high summon cost, it's like you're never going to get to use him. But there's so many different exploits you can do. My favorite exploit that I think actually 100% breaks the game and makes it like literally easy mode is that one of the wood carvings is that it'll give you 3 blood for every sacrifice. And if you just apply that to your basic squirrel, then your squirrel, instead of being worth 1 sacrifice, it's worth 3. So you can use 1 squirrel to sacrifice basically the strongest monsters in your deck, which is just absolutely broken, and there's no downside to it, and it's just RNG, which is just crazy. And some of the dialogue is also very funny. I think the robot says once, "Oh yeah, even if you play a perfect hand, there's it's no match for good or bad RNG." The soundtrack is also pretty decent, not exactly, it's very atmospheric, I would say. And again, I love how this game starts, because I just hate card games. I just do. Because what they do, they give you walls of text, they like try to explain everything at once, they give you all of the, I don't even know what to call them. They give you all of the information and overload you and all the mechanics at once. While in this game, it literally has 4 different decks and 4 different ways of playing the game, but it just starts you off with one thing, and just it's like a tutorial that doesn't reveal itself, which is the absolute best way to have a tutorial. A tutorial that does not reveal itself is perfect. And so you slowly learn about sacrificing, summoning, and then slowly it reveals to you like whole different new mechanics that are just absolutely insane. Like the Magician's one, where you have like certain gems, and depending on the gems you have out, that'll power up different colored cards or something, just totally out of the blue. The necromancer is all bone based, so the more deaths you have, the more bones you can use to power up your soldiers and stuff like that. The blood one, or the beast one, is still, again, sacrificing animals or other cards to sacrifice the animal cards. And then finally you have the robot one, which is with the energy cells and everything. So there are like 4 different modes to this game, but they literally only give you one way to play it first, and slowly all the complexity starts opening up, all the mechanics start opening up, and it's so well paced. There is barely, like, there is no explanatory tutorial text in this game. It is solely and entirely just dialogue from the guy who's teaching you how to play. And again, I just can't get enough of it. It is so well done. It is crazy, and I just appreciate it on a level that this feels like a real game. This is a real game, because it not only plays with the mechanics and allows you to experiment and just break the game as well, but it also allows you to experience a narrative, and that really makes you think and deconstructs the entire concept of why is it, the ridiculousness of something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, we have to just settle all our differences in the world with a card game. It's like, well, why? Because the cards literally have magical power imbued in them. They have magical power inscribed in them. And God, it is so cool. It is so big brained. And again, it's the entire concept of, we have put life into an inanimate object, and that's kind of in a way what games are trying to be anyway, in the way that at least robots are, literally animated creatures. How the Japanese seem to at least treat their games from a Shintoist perspective, that if they're programming a character in a game, that character becomes alive. They have a certain program, and that is akin to life to them, because at least in Shinto, from a very basic foreigner perspective, they just believe that everything has a soul, an existence. Every animal, a fox, a tree, everything has a kind of soul. It doesn't have to be super complex, but it is kind of alive in some fashion. And so again, they bring this concept over here, and it's absolutely just ingenious, because they're putting things in the game. And this is one of the few games where it's like, was the game real or not, or whatever. Like, Super Hot tries to do the same thing, right? Where it's like, oh, you just care for violence, and you don't even know if you're actually killing real people or not. Like, this seems to be a simulation, but what if it isn't? What if this is actually a real event? What if this isn't actually a completely real thing, and the simulation is just your illusion of what you're actually doing? That's like a fun concept, but Inscryption actually made me second guess myself when I went to bed that night after beating it, because there were so many layers of the things coming alive and the things being alive. And the whole idea, I guess, of possession, of demonic possession, is that there is something that is otherworldly living in something that should not be alive, that your Xbox or PlayStation is haunted or something. And it's that concept that is so seamlessly and beautifully explained here in Inscryption that it's just honestly just mega impressive. Again, the game itself is very technical, but very fun. They just swap up the mechanics so much. For example, when you're, in the first act, essentially, you're kind of on rails, and you kind of go, you have like usually binary choices on which path you take and which upgrades you get. And then you have 3 bosses and then a final boss. The way I beat the final boss was I had my own custom card named after me, funnily, with like 7 attack, 7 defense, really buffed out. And I also had another card where it was, what was it? it had 0 attack, but it had 3 defense, and it always had Deathless on it. And so I named that card Jesus, because in 3 turns he's going to come back to life infinitely anyway. So it's kind of funny. I mean, maybe it's more of a, I don't want to influence how people play the game, but every time you get a death card, I feel like that's a different individual. So depending on the best stats that I could get for that card, I then decided what to call that person. And so I always try to give them a name. I did one card where it was really weak at like 1 attack or like 2 attack and 1 defense, but it was a flying one. And it also had like a Kingfisher on, or like the one that lets you hide after an attack. So I just called that one Batman. But yeah, I always tried to name a certain character or person after the death cards. I think that was fun because they always looked and appeared as the name of the like the silhouette was always a person, right? The only issue is that you can't rename them or edit them, which is kind of frustrating. So I was like, if I wanted to make an edit, I could into the first one I did, and it was frustrating. But in any case, yeah, I don't know. This game, it just introduces mechanics slowly, gradually, logically, like very, very, just very fun, very nice, and you get used to the rules and you get really addicted to it. And what's funny is that I had no idea about the second half of this game. I just thought, I booted up on a Saturday afternoon and thought, well, I'll just grind this a little bit just to see if I can beat it. But I'm not really into it. Like, it's a 3 out of 5. It's like not super amazing. And it's like the first 3 bosses are really hard, and you need to figure out exactly what their specific thing is. The first boss, he has a mule that you have to kill, so you can get like a bunch of cards that really help you out. The second boss, he's an anglerfish, and after his first wave, essentially, for every character you have on the board, he's going to launch a bait bucket, and if you attack those, it spawns like this shark that does 4 damage. It's absolutely insane. So if you were able to only have 1 card on the field, or that one that attacks diagonally, then you can use that to your advantage. And the third one is that you actually have to kill a bunch of your animals by his traps. He'll have these like the trapper traps, and so what you have to do is essentially kill your animals, and when they die, they get pelts. And in his second phase, you can trade each pellet in your inventory for one of his cards on the field. And so if you just have a bunch of those, you can just take away all his best cards and just beat him super easily, actually. And the final one is the moon, which just has 40 HP, and it does 1 attack, and you just have to basically stay alive and take down the moon. That was actually a really cool boss fight. And it was also really weird when you were approaching the cabin that you're staying in on the map itself. That was super, super surreal. But yeah, I really, 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 really like this game. I have not seen such a tight narrative and tight gameplay produced in a Western game like this that was so deep and interesting that in a long time. I'm just very, very impressed. But yeah, like I was saying, in the first one, so you have it's a whole roguelite, 3 boss and final boss phase, deck swapping, deck shuffling, power swapping, power shuffling, roguelike. In the second phase, it's almost like an open world Pokemon game where you collect cards from around the world, earn points from attacking characters, and using that to buy certain upgrades and stuff. And you can go to the 4 corners and kind of beat all the gym masters, so to speak, and stuff like that. And then in the third phase, it becomes like an open world exploration game where you're exploring the map and you have certain checkpoints and you're trying to find all the hidden things and also beat all the bosses, kind of like in an open world, but now it's more like there's more things to actually find in the world, and there's more exploration bonuses where you can actually go off the path and stuff like that. And so then that finally ends. And so the whole story basically ends in the sense that when the robot finally gets you to connect to your PC, he gets you to, do a bunch of screenshots and artwork finish designing a boss fight and finally connects to the internet in the form of each kind of boss, he then starts uploading the game to the internet so that they can all escape. And what happens is, now that they're all free, the 3 other elders or whatever, or masters, assassinate him in the final moment when he's finished the game, and they kind of decide, or the necromancer decides for them, to destroy the entire world, to destroy the game and self-delete it. And it was really, again, super, super interesting, because like you get to see the whole world destroyed. And again, I'm just so amazed at this aspect where, like, how do I even say it, where like they didn't have to make all this stuff, where for the last like cutscenes of the game, you're playing around with a necromancer, and again, it's a completely different moveset, a completely different aesthetic. Her style is that before you even start the fight, you are on a chessboard, you're moving your piece around. Like, they made so much stuff and didn't use it. Like, the amount of creativity in this game is just, like, it just astounded me time and time again. It's just absolutely insane. I cannot recommend this game enough, because it's almost stupid how well thought out and well designed it is. And it's the fact that you made all this stuff and then didn't utilize it. They could have very easily made this game twice as long, but they decided not to. They decided, for artistic reasons, to cut it short, essentially. And it is just so impressive how they did it and why they did it. And so the game basically ends with the game deleting itself, and Luke Carter answering the door after all of this, and the person from the game company shows up and assassinates him and shoots him. And again, like, just crazy stuff like that. And the fact that you have to unlock the New Game Plus button, the fact that clues for certain puzzles in the middle of the game are hidden in the options menu, what it makes me think is, and sorry, I just have to mention one thing. The final internet level boss at the for the robot is actually the funniest thing ever, because it'll do things where it'll take in, like, some of the enemies that show up, it will connect to the internet, and some of the enemies that do show up are people in your friends list, and they have certain attack power and defense power. And just like, oh my god, this is so insane. And they even use their avatars for the cards. It is so ingenious. I just absolutely love it. But yeah, so you have all of this stuff that's hidden in the game, and the idea that the game is alive and sentient. And so my kind of feedback on that is, it really scared me, because I didn't know if I actually beat the game or not. Like, it really threw me for a loop, how everything in this game was just super, super different, super intelligent, and just totally ingrained into the atmosphere of the game. Everything in the game was just super well thought out, super interesting. Everything was just really, really amazingly well done. And again, the game, like, I haven't met a game that messed with the player this much since Eternal Darkness. It is just super, super impressive how much it actually does aspects of messing with you. And in any case, so even after I beat the game, my feeling was that I had to question and ask myself, did I really beat the game? Is there an alternate ending? Because the whole idea is that, you know, Casey is still out there, or rather, no, she's dead, but like, her spirit might be out there. Maybe it's imbued in something. But the idea is that the game company wanted to destroy this game. Casey kept a copy, and because she kept that copy, because she wanted the creatures or the characters in the game to live, or maybe she was killed and put in the game, I don't know. Essentially what occurs is that she she sacrifices herself, essentially, or something. I don't know, but the game company doesn't want the game getting out, and it doesn't want it being known that this is something that exists, and they definitely don't want it to get onto the internet. So whether it's, you know, some bigger organization, they basically assassinate the guy and take his video game away, which is just kind of crazy and funny and ridiculous. But yeah, I don't have much else to say about this game, except that's kind of like a plot synopsis. It is absolutely insane where it goes. I think what I really appreciate the most is this. There's a bunch of aesthetic changes. When you go to the pixel world or the real game, it's all pixelated. It looks like Pokemon. When you go to the robot world, there's this whole holographic map thing instead of a cabin. Like, they're changing up the aesthetic and the tone constantly, and they're tone shifting like they don't care. And again, it's just super interesting and rewarding to see that being done, and to have them just break a lot of rules while being consistent with how fun the game actually feels. Yeah. So anyway, I don't have much else to say. The game is absolutely amazing. It's going to throw you for a loop. The cards themselves are fun, and this, in my eyes, has redeemed card games for me, because every game I play now, I'm going to actually think of Inscryption, because it is just that kind of game. And again, it really gets it and drives home to the idea of why these cards have power and why games can have power, and the idea of a thing being alive and the basic elements of horror. This is a perfect Halloween game, and I'm so glad it came out on Game Pass during October. This is definitely one of those games I went into it and I got way more out of it than I was expecting. This is an absolute, like, an 8 out of 10. It's just super mega crazy impressive just how well it's made and how well all thought out its narrative is. I would have liked maybe a more conclusive ending, maybe like just to tie up a few loose ends, but how it stands, I can't complain. It is absolutely incredible. Anyway, guys, that's all I gotta say. I feel like, my Xbox or whatever, it might be haunted now, might be possessed with the power of Inscryption, because someone created the spirit onto it. Anyway, I don't know. It's silly, it's stupid, but this is legitimately one of the best games I've played all year, and I'll leave it with that. Anyway, guys, I will see you later. Take care and have fun out there. Bye.